you. We hear, yeah, Mr. Barker's out, but he's Chief Executive is wandering in. That's good. That's all right. So we're moving to item 7, which is another notice of motion, this time from Councillor Paul Bailey, in regard a moratorium on the release of GMOs in our region. So I'll hand it over to you, Paul.
Thank you, Chair. Just before we start, I had a typo in my motion, wording of my motion, outlining steps needed rather than outlining steps need. Place the moratorium. I suppose one could argue that a moratorium would have no effect in the long run, that it would be pointless if, for example, GMOs to...
Sorry, has this been seconded?
Oh, we need a second before you go. Oh, okay, we've got to move, we've got a seconder.
Thank you. Tom.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate that. Ex-Chair.
I suppose one could... Yeah. You do forget these things, don't we? Yeah. I suppose one could argue that a moratorium would have no effect in the long run, that it would be pointless if, for example, GMOs were to be released in the Tararua district. This is a valid argument. Unfortunately, also I believe it is short-sighted. It lacks vision. I'm proud to put up a motion to make Hawke's Bay GE-free. One of the key drivers for New Zealand to become nuclear-free was the announcement by various local authorities that they were to become nuclear-free. I see a shift to a GE-free Hawke's Bay in a similar light. The more that local authorities move on this issue, the more difficult it becomes for central government to take away our democratic right to manage our own affairs. This argument this argument cannot be articulated as being we shouldn't do this because our neighbours won't. Someone has to lead. It should be us. It could also be argued that a moratorium on GMOs is unnecessary because GMOs are perfectly safe. When I look at the correlation evidence from the USA between the introduction of GMOs resulting in an increased use of Roundup-type products and the increasing prevalence of 32 different conditions, including the likes of Alzheimer's, autism and infertility, I have to wonder just how safe is safe. And this is why consumers balk at buying GMO products. This is why this moratorium is so important. It gives our agriculture and horticulture sectors an immediate competitive advantage at no cost and very little effort. To my mind, any debate around the science is irrelevant. It is an argument about branding and marketing our products. It is the perception of consumers that count. After all, that's what opens their wallets. That's what allows us to gain a premium price for a premium product. I've always considered the argument that we need to feed the world as very shallow. Most of the world survives on $2 a day. Is this really our target market? I would hope that our marketers have more vision than this. Of course, there is always the argument that the release of GMOs will destroy our organic sector, and this is true. GMOs and organics cannot exist in parallel. Why should we destroy one of, if not the fastest growing agriculture sector, which has every right to exist, simply to sell commodity products to the lowest common denominator? That's not visionary at all. I mean, after all, when I sit down and watch these TV chefs, they don't say, how's a nice GMO chicken or something. They always say, I'm going to get a nice organic chicken. But we also need to be pragmatic. For example, would we ban the release of a GMO solution to possums, stoats and ferrets simply because it includes GMOs? I don't think so. To my mind, the key to this initiative is to ensure GMOs are kept out of the food chain. I also believe that the cost of the necessary plan change can be reduced by running it in parallel with the proposed plan change around oil and gas exploration. I look at it as halving the cost of both processes, but in any event, there should be little additional cost to the ratepayers. So, I'd also like to add that, of course, the particular motion I've got in place or proposing is merely to get a paper together to outline the arguments, to put steps in place to do this process, and not actually this isn't a motion to put a ban on anything at the moment. It's just to start the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Before we go, Tom, we'll take questions and discussion before, and I actually have 2 questions based on. Is this essentially supporting the Hastings district position? That's the first question. And the second question is it true that GMOs can't exist with organics in the same rohi?
Yeah, firstly, I would see if we took any action in terms of a plan change, that it should sit in conjunction with what Hastings District Council has done. I don't see any reason why we should be trumping them or changing the world in that respect. In terms of organics and GMOs not being able to coexist, the discussions I've had with different people in the organic sector, it's a real problem for them because it does affect their certifications.
Okay, any more questions or discussion before we, Councillor Dick?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, through you to Councillor Bailey, would you be prepared that such a paper goes to Regional Planning Committee on a balanced and objective basis, and that is that it reviews the science and the marketing viewpoint. In other words, it provides some balanced information to the Regional Planning Committee in order for it to make a decision. If it was of that nature, I could support it, but I wouldn't support something going forward on the basis that it's considered intrinsically that GMO is bad and that the present regulatory environment, which is nationally controlled, is flawed. That's my question.
Thank you, Councillor Dick. Very good question. I would be disappointed if any advice we got from, or any advice we got from staff wasn't given without fair nor favour. I expect it to fully cover what you have. Otherwise, we don't have a full and frank discussion.
Thank you. Would you be able to modify your resolution slightly to embrace that?
Thank you. I'm not sure if my question is for Andrew or James, but I understand there's a pretty robust regulatory framework in New Zealand that covers GMOs. We've got HASNO, Hazardous Substances and New Organisms Act. We've got IRMA, Environmental Risk Management Authority. We've got MPI from the food angle, who have taken over New Zealand Food Safety Authority. What are the advantages in councils getting involved in this when it's already so regulated at a national level?
Chairman, if I could just perhaps back the truck up a little bit and respond to both the notice of motion and the question just put by Councillor Hewitt. First thing to say on this is that a piece of work to provide advice to Council on all of the issues relating to genetically modified organisms, both in terms of the way they're regulated and in terms of the science, would be a substantial body of work which is not currently programmed into the work program of Council staff. My suggestion to you is that if you wish to explore this matter expeditiously, that some preliminary advice around the legal framework issues come forward first before getting into the substantive issues, on the basis that those legal issues may result in the Council concluding that there is no further work to be done on this matter. The reason I say that is that this matter is live nationally with respect to developing jurisprudence. The Hastings District Council's proposals are not yet settled. They still remain subject to appeal, and both the Hastings District Council and Federated Farmers have agreed to put on hold their current court process around the Hastings District Council proposed provisions, and that is on hold until the other court cases that are happening nationally provide some clarity around the legal position. There are two processes in particular that are running nationally. One is the Federated Farmers have sought leave from the Supreme Court to hear a appeal in relation to the Court of Appeals, the High Court's rulings to date on the Northland Regional Council's proposal for provisions in the regional policy statement So to be clear, this is not about a rule, this is about a policy position in the Northland Regional Policy Statement, and why that's significant I'll come back to in a moment. The other significant piece of legal action in this space relates to the Auckland Unitary Plan. The Auckland Unitary Plan is significant in that it's a unitary council, so there are both functions of regional councils and territorial authorities at play. That takes us back to the question of the regional policy statement and or any rules. The Hastings District Council provisions relate to land use controls. Regional councils have highly prescribed functions with respect to land use controls, and they relate mainly to things such as discharges to water bodies. And it's not clear, in fact it looks unlikely, based on certainly my reading of the legislation, that regional councils have the power to regulate land use with respect to particular organisms. The closest we are legally able to regulate such activities would be if they could be considered contaminants. Contaminants are defined in the Act as substances, and it's pretty clear that the intent of Parliament was to regulate organisms through two other pieces of legislation, not the RMA, through the Hazardous Substances and New Organisms Act and the Biosecurity Act, over which there are particular processes that would have to be followed. Obviously, the HASNO provisions are regulated by the EPA, and while we have the ability to regulate things under the Biosecurity Act, we would have to demonstrate that those genetically modified organisms are justifiably unwanted organisms, and to do that without any particular detail of what the organism was and its effect would be nigh on impossible. So the long and the short of which is that there is a big legal question over whether or not we have any jurisdiction at all within GMOs. That is being tested and will be tested presumably by the Supreme Court in the next 12 months. And therefore, the question that I would be putting to the Regional Planning Committee in the new year is to whether or not you want to spend any considerable amount of council resource, staff time and money potentially at the displacement of other work while those legal questions remain unresolved, or whether you would prefer to wait till the jurisprudence has come forward and the role of regional councils is clear. I also would note that there is legislation which has courted some degree of controversy nationally before the House at the moment, Local Government's Environment Select Committee, the Resource Legislation Amendment Bill, that may potentially clarify this as well, and it may clarify it in terms of further limiting the role of local governments in decision making and all of this. So that may not be satisfactory to some councillors or to members of the community, but it is simply a statement of where we're at legally at the moment on these issues, and happy to write that up and to provide some advice to the RPC. But I certainly would counsel against a motion today that seeks us providing comprehensive advice on these issues until those legal matters had been further settled.
Just a point of clarification, James, the recommendation just says receive and notes the notice of motion from Councillor Bailey. It doesn't say any action, it just says receive and recommend the matter to the Regional Planning Committee. So I think it's pretty innocuous, really. It doesn't really get into those depths that you are talking about.
Yes, I just wanted to manage expectations that staff would bring back a fully blown paper considering all the issues which have been raised.
Yeah, and I think you've covered that quite well.
Just to ask a follow-up question, Chair. In regard to the advice you've just given us, James, if it was agreed that we, as a first step, got a paper that covered the legal framework that we're dealing with in relation to GMO, would it be more appropriate that it comes back to this council rather than the RPC?
Essentially, it is a planning matter and a Resource Management Act planning matter. So my advice would be that the appropriate committee of council would be the RPC.
Follow up to that question. If we were simply looking to go on record endorsing the position of the Hastings Council, would you still say that that is a matter for the RPC?
Not
Not launching us into a planning process of our own and so forth?
Not necessarily, although I'd make the observation that the Regional Planning Committee is the committee that typically oversees our submissions to other councils and our statutory advocacy and other council planning processes. So essentially us taking a position in relation to the Hastings District Council district plan is a function of our broader planning activities, and so I think it does sit with the RPC, and I think we do need to think about our policy position, if you like, and whether or not we believe that Hastings District Council's position is consistent with the regional policy statement and consistent with our broader objectives as a council.
Just a point of clarification, on 5.1, James does say that if we agreed with these, that we would prepare a one-pager just on the points that you've raised, really. So you would even verbally report on that to the
Yes,
regional
although I
planning.
would suggest that trying to get all of these issues onto one page may be challenging, Chair. The legal complexities around this are enormous.
Or A3.
It's just outlining the
Small
steps.
font.
We've just spent 5 minutes, and we only want that 5-minute dissertation. Okay, yes. Well, before you come, just saying, does anyone else got, I think we'll go to debate. So we have a mover and a seconder. We will go to debate if there's no more questions. So, you're on, Tom. As a seconder.
I'm going to support the motion, and adding some further context. First of all, this whole initiative is I guess, orchestrated primarily through Pure Hawke's Bay, which is an organization that has very, very, very broad representation in the growing community of Hawke's Bay, and I would dare say the support of that part of the community that actually makes money at farming and expects to make more money by laying a claim in the marketplace that is built around pure, natural, premium, etc. And most people who look at the sector that I am in contact with think that that is the way that our primary production economy in Hawke's Bay needs to move in the future. So from the standpoint of that group, this is a marketing-led initiative. It is about, as Councillor Bailey said, the food chain and protecting claims of the purity, if you will, of our food products in Hawke's Bay. It is not a inquiry or anything aimed at medicinal uses of et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's a very narrowly cast initiative. That's one point. Secondly, and so I actually find curious that Federated Farmers winds up being the appellant party here in the Hastings case, and I would really question who the hell they speak for in laying that position. But be that as it may, the other issue here is one of I would say self-determination. As you point out, the amendments to the national legislation are stacked in a number of areas as basically trying to remove the discretion of regions and regional councils like this to act on the wishes of that are being strongly expressed and strongly supported within their domains. And that's a serious issue here, I think. And so I see this, even if our ultimate position were to be as simply as we want to stand shoulder to shoulder with the Hastings Council and the position they've taken, as also representing that this is a position that a preponderance, I would argue, of the growing community in our region feels is absolutely vital to their livelihood, and that we're standing behind that. That's what we're doing here by moving this forward. The legal actions, who knows where they could come. I mean, the direction has been, as I understand it, has been in the direction of allowing these regional initiatives, to the complete consternation of Nick Smith. But, you know, short of Nick Smith, I'm not sure where the body politic at large lies. So it doesn't trouble me that we have a national government that has one view, and we have what appears to be a very vibrant grassroots community throughout New Zealand, not just here in Hawke's Bay, that is acting to protect what it feels is, for some people, protecting public health, and for other people, protecting a market position that we must protect if Hawke's Bay and New Zealand are to thrive in the primary sector going forward.
Paul, you should have moved, you should have spoken first, I apologise.
That's okay, Chair. Look, I'm happy with the wording that's up on screen there. If staff feels that the first one of the first steps we need to take is to seek legal advice on what we can and can't do in terms of our jurisdiction under the RMA or whatever, I'm fine with that. To me, it's kicking off a process, and whatever comes out of that comes out of that. But you know, like as has been articulated by Councillor Belford, I certainly see this as a marketing and branding issue rather than a science issue at all. So I think this is the first part of a path we need to travel.
Mr. Chairman, I wonder, given the immense workload pressures that James and his team are under, in particular referring to the Ruataniwha review, major job with deadlines on it, that the recommendation could be amended, taking out the next regional planning committee, and perhaps adding at the end, so it read that staff prepare papers for the regional planning committee, and maybe at the end saying that the initial briefing paper would focus on legal issues surrounding this matter. Would that define it a bit better?
I'd be happy with that, Councillor Dick. If my seconders happy with that?
As long as it gets onto the next regional planning committee.
Well, that might be too much of an ask.
See, that's right. I mean, we don't need copious amounts of documents. If James came along and gave a verbal report, the important issue is that we discuss this at the regional planning committee.
Absolutely, Chair.
So,
Well, what can be managed, Mr. Chairman? Looking at James. No, that's not good enough.
We can give a summary of the legal position as we understand it. The current case is in train, so essentially outlining what I just provided verbally, but in writing, and perhaps the fuller detail of that and the key provisions of the legislation, so that all members of the regional planning committee at least understand the legislative context, and then from there we can discuss whether or not there's merit in undertaking further deeper analytical work.
any other speakers? Yes, Councillor?
Briefly, Chair, I can't support this. I can't believe I'm hearing that we need a council process planning process to provide marketing opportunities for a portion of the bay. Surely that's a job for producers, just as it's a job for me as a producer to do my thing. So I can't support this, and I think it's going to be a waste of resource from this council.
Councillor Hewitt?
Thanks, Chair. I won't be supporting this motion either. Genetic modification has been used freely in New Zealand for more than a decade now as a research tool for medical purposes and in food ingredients. It holds exciting promise, not only for conquering diseases, eliminating pests and contributing to the knowledge economy, but for enhancing the international competitive of the primary industries, so very important to our country's economic well-being. If we take, in the first instance, medical people who don't support GE technologies, and either they or their loved ones have a medical issue, I'd suggest that their thinking will be severely challenged if it turns out that some processes that utilise genetically modified technologies are able to save them or their loved ones. So the real test comes a little bit closer to home than branding and marketing of premium produce, I'd suggest. I'm in favour of New Zealand keeping its options open. It's really unwise to turn our backs on the potential advantages that GE has to offer, but we should proceed carefully, minimising and managing risks, and at the same time, continuation of the development of conventional farming, organics and integrated pest management should be facilitated. So in preserving opportunities and looking forward, I'd like to encourage the coexistence of all forms of agriculture. Different production systems should not be seen as being in opposition to each other, but rather as contributing in their own unique ways to the overall benefit of New Zealand.
Thank you. There we have it. The recommendation. I'm going to put the recommendation as it is on the board there now, unless you want to write a reply right now, Councillor, or have you said?
Yeah, just a reminder there, thank you, Councillor Hewitt, is that I totally get the health thing, and I also understand there's other uses, for example, bacteria that could potentially deal with petroleum spills and the like. But I'm really focused on the whole issue of keeping GE out of the food chain, because that's what consumers want, and that's where it creates the marketing opportunity. And it's up to the agriculture sector, I think, to take up that opportunity if they want to or not. I think they'd be crazy not to, but it's entirely in the ball's entirely in their court. But we're setting them up for that opportunity.
Okay, we have the motion before us. All those in favour? So aye. Aye. Against? Division, calling for division. All those in favour? And against?
Thank you, Councillor.
Motion is carried. So that's you. Any questions? Otherwise, the recommendation is move to fix the common seal. Seconder. All those in favour? Aye. That got rid of that one.
That was remarkable.
For this lot. Okay, we're moving to this. Might not be quite so remarkable.